Hey everyone, hello, it's great to see you again and welcome to my little soiree down here at the bottom of the garden. Seriously, welcome to the parish of the Holy Shed. And fear not, there's plenty of room in this bijou sanctuary for one and all. Just remember, it may not be big, but it's small. So, how are you doing? Enjoying more freedom in the UK, at least, anyway. Getting out to the pub, maybe going for a drink. Down to the cafe, getting a pizza. Going down to the hairdressers. Look, I've had a haircut. Uh, Freedom at last from my mophead mane, and I thought I'd show it off to you tonight. Not wear a hat, but let you see my head, my shaven head in all its glory. And listen, do you know what? Massive congratulations to Penny in Middlesbrough, who observed that in one of our anniversary pictures, which I posted on Facebook earlier in the week, my table in the shed did not have books behind it like it normally does. Aha, detective work. The reason being, dear Shedsters, that Monday was such a beautiful day. I wanted to turn the furniture around and look out onto the garden and snap some pics of the birds at the feeder and a bird on the veranda too, actually. So, hey, Penny, if there was a prize, you would definitely get it, girl, for top observation. So yeah, we had a spectacular day actually. We went out on our anniversary day to Abbotsbury and climbed the hill to St Catherine's Chapel, which is a uh, wonderful little chapel actually up there on top of a hill, looking out over Chesil Beach, where we sat and had a picnic. Lovely, lovely time. And yeah, for the more nosy among you who've been asking, or maybe the more inquisitive, we have been married, well, a long time. When we were about 10, actually. Um, I was 19, really, but don't tell anybody. Now, for the regulars in the parish, you'll know that I really like to start our sessions by lighting a candle as a kind of prayer. The beauty of candle lighting, I think, is its universalism. It don't matter really if you're religious or not religious, if you're a believer or an atheist. Lighting a candle is this universally recognized way of expressing wishes or longings, prayers, by whatever word. So I hope you've got a candle handy, and if you do, maybe you'd like to take it to hand, and I invite you to light it and then to be quiet with me for a few moments to focus the mind on whatever or whoever it is that you are concerned about tonight. Um, Name that person or situation and focus your attention on them for just a few moments. Call it prayer or a wish or just good vibration. Send some love out into the world. So if you just like to set that aside, keep your candle burning in more ways than one. Now, I promised to tell you from time to time a little bit about the books that I'm surrounded by here in the shed. So today, I want to commend these two books to you. Um, The God We Never Knew, Beyond Dogmatic Religion to a More Authentic Contemporary Faith, and The Heart of Christianity. Both of these are by Marcus Borg, who's a leading Jesus scholar. You know, there's a whole field of scholarship that focuses on trying to uh, recover the historical Jesus, the Jesus that lies beyond all the affirmations of faith in the church and so on. And so these are by Marcus Borg, lovely, wonderful man who we sadly lost a couple of years ago, but thankfully he left behind this incredible heritage of wonderful writings that I think can help anyone who is trying to reconstruct their faith in a sensible and heartwarming way in today's world. So enjoy those. You know, when I served as a chaplain in the late 1990s to a hospital specializing in treating people with HIV/AIDS, I took a funeral. I took many funerals actually, but I took the funeral of Brian, who was an elegant, intelligent man, effectively married to his partner Peter for 19 years. AIDS has killed lots of people, you know, in many ways. And Brian took his own life because he finally couldn't escape the internalized voice of God from his religious upbringing, which told him that he was a vile sinner for loving men's bodies. At the funeral, his mother movingly screamed out loud, reviling the faith that she herself had introduced Brian to as a child. "Why have you done this to my beautiful son?" she cried. "He was full of love. Why did you drive him to do this?" I didn't know if it was God or the church that she railed against that day, or whether it even matters. I do know that I deeply regret that I couldn't convince Brian to dump the wretched, critical, punitive God from his religious past and discover the loving, compassionate, empowering sense of God that I personally live with. But I can tell you this, Brian was far from alone. Horribly inhumane notions of God blight the lives of many LGBT plus people, but also hordes of others who live with guilt, shame, and failure because of this miserable deity. And these people write to me most weeks of my life. I get messages, emails, letters from people who very much tell the same kind of story. And I've spent much of my life, much of my ministry, helping people to reinvent God, to ditch these images of God embedded in the psyche that cause them suffering and self-recrimination, and to discover a God of unconditional love who enables them to flourish and become the people they deep down wish to be. In some instances, I explicitly encourage them to reimagine God in their own ethnic likeness, to picture God, for example, as a black woman or man. I feel devastated, you know, especially in this age of Black Lives Matter. I feel devastated that so many non-white people that I've talked with and counseled over the years, when I got down to it, I found pictured God as a white male. I once encouraged a young Asian woman to take up a spiritual practice of drawing pictures of God as an Asian mother figure, as a way of loving herself, loving her ethnicity, loving her heritage, and discovering in the process an entirely different, not just image, but a different experience of God. How can anyone, I wonder, how can any of us sense that we are beloved children of the universe if we experience God as ethnically and culturally alien to ourselves, or as a guilt-mongering, mean-minded ogre? How can this possibly help us to have a healthy relationship with God or faith? Of course, God is no more or less an Asian woman than a European man. God surpasses categories of race and gender. And yet, at the heart of the Christian message, it's this message that God penetrates and inhabits humanity. Not one particular strand of humanity, one gender or ethnicity, but all of humanity. Claiming that God in some way indwelt Jesus does not mean that God is a first century Jewish man, but that God becomes flesh and blood over and over in every person, in every expression of humanity, male and female, gay and straight, black and white, rich and poor, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, and atheist. Can I say hallelujah? Because that's what I believe. When our friend Meg Rowe, an artist in Holloway, heard a black woman say that she never saw images in churches that she could identify with as a black woman, Meg decided to recreate Andrei Rublev's magnificent icon of the Holy Trinity. This is Rublev's 15th century image of the Trinity. And it's beautiful because it's portrayed not, as is very often the case, as a male hierarchy. There are three androgynous figures situated in a circular dance. If you took a ring and focus it so that you can get the three figures in it, you'd see that they all fit in this circular dance, and it's a wonderful, wonderful image. But Meg decided when she heard this woman speak to rewrite the icon, and I'm afraid this isn't the best colour version of the icon that I could get hold of, but there you go. But she rewrote the icon with three non-white figures representing the Trinity here. Not three men, not three androgynous figures, but two women and a man, modelled by three actual members of the church community that I used to lead at St. Luke's. And she did this as a way of affirming, yes, that Black Lives Matter, but the question is why? Why do they matter? And this icon says, because blackness is part of who God is. Blackness comes out of God. And beyond that, I believe that Meg's icon actually explodes in many directions. The figures could equally be disabled people or LGBT people, First Nation Australians or Americans. I mean, you name it, they could be anybody, because that's what the icon is saying. And here's the thing. Last week, here in the shed, I was saying that God isn't a being among other beings, even the most supreme being, but rather God is the ground of being. God doesn't exist. That's far too narrow and small a concept. God doesn't exist. God is existence. So how do we hold together these two things? Our human need for God to have a face that we can identify with, that we can comprehend and relate to, and the deeper reality that whatever we mean by God must transcend every notion, every image, every visualization or verbalization that we can possibly come up with. As I said last time, ultimately, I am personally more comfortable seeing God as that in which we live and move and have our being, the life energy at the heart of the universe. Much more that than as some human-like being, even the greatest being possible. In 1901, in what turned out to be a seminal work called The Varieties of Religious Experience, William James spoke intriguingly of a God who does retail as well as wholesale business. Or, as I'd say, there is a wholesale God and a retail God, which may sound weird language, but the wholesale God that I'm referring to is the God that we cannot describe. God beyond all names, all designations. God beyond God, as Paul Tillich once put it. This is the God which is the ground of being, that doesn't exist but is existence itself, the ultimate reality within and beyond all that is. The retail God, on the other hand, is God with a face and a name, the God of biblical stories and church liturgy, the God that we know as Father or Mother, Lover, Shepherd, Deliverer, the God named differently in different religious traditions. Typically, though not always, the retail God is personified, and these personifications become the natural language of prayer, devotion, and church language. It's the language of lived spirituality. Retail religion involves speaking to or about God with the sense that God is a being with some likeness to ourselves. And that's important. That's part of how human consciousness works. But is God personal? Well, as I said last week, I certainly experience God as personal, and that's perhaps the most important thing. However, I don't think that the only alternative to personal is impersonal. And I probably prefer, as I said last week, to think of God as transpersonal or suprapersonal. By this, I mean that God is everything that we can possibly imagine and include within the notion of personhood, and then masses more. When we experience the retail God, we experience empathy and compassion, healing and hope. These are human qualities, but they're things that we believe are God-given. We shout and sing and celebrate God's love when we experience the retail God. But when we experience God as the wholesale God, then we experience mystery, a deep and dazzling darkness, the cloud of unknowing. We sense reverence, awe, and wonder. Our God talk diminishes, and we end up being reduced basically to silence because there are no words that are appropriate. Now, I have no problem at all with the retail version of God. I've spent most of my life running retail outlets. I use retail God language all the time, especially in church. It's not true. I mean, it's not literally true. Of course it isn't. God isn't a man or a woman, a king or a queen. And yet this does not mean that retail language is untrue. When we say that we love someone with all our heart, it may be profoundly true, but it's not literally true. Only crude fundamentalism, religious and non-religious, requires that literal fact is the basis for truth. And that's a point that we will definitely come back to on another occasion in the shed. It's in the retail area that we most often need to reinvent God talk, to reinvent our notion and image of God. The God that tormented Brian was a dreadful retail God. The big guy in the sky controlling events on earth, I think, is a bizarre retail God. You know, the one who supposedly blesses his children while allowing millions of others to suffer or starve. Don't tell me that makes any sense at all. The God people like Richard Dawkins rant on about. It's all that sort of big guy in the sky out there. When it comes to many such retail notions of God, I have to say, I'm as passionate an atheist as you'll find anywhere. So the question is, how are we to judge between good and bad retail impressions of God? Well, then I turn for help from the wholesale God, the ground of our being, because somewhere there in the depths of my being as a true Quaker here, I find a light, I find testimony to things like love and justice and beauty and truth and freedom to be. Things actually that I also find in Jesus, but also see in others. And to me, such things, all goodness, emanates from the source that I call God. In my book, The Bad Christian's Manifesto, which incidentally is subtitled How to Reinvent God and Other Modest Proposals, I talk in there about Brenda, a brilliant woman I met whose life was blighted by the draconian religion of a horribly fundamentalist father. She could recite verses from the Bible. She could utter religious platitudes about God's love till the cows come home. But in her heart, I discovered in sessions with her, in her heart, she really believed that God disapproved of virtually everything about her. God may love me, she told me once, but he definitely doesn't like me. I mean, God, I would say, in inverted commas, literally made Brenda's life a misery. I often think about committing suicide, she told me, but I'm frightened if I do that I'll go to hell. In a conversation where I was struggling to help her reconstruct, to reinvent her notion of God, I asked her if there was anyone who she felt had really loved her. My grandma, she replied immediately with a great enthusiasm and a big grin sweeping across her face. It was like she became another person when she mentioned her grandma. What is it then, I said, what is it about your grandma that makes you so happy? And she told me how when she was a small child at her grandma's home, she knocked over a treasured vase, a family heirloom. Now, knowing how important that vase was, the little girl screamed out as it crashed to the ground, breaking into 1,000 pieces. But when her grandma rushed into the room, there was no sign of anger, no recrimination, just relief. "Thank God," she said. "Thank God. I thought you were hurt." And she grabbed Brenda into her arms and held her to her bosom. Recalling the story with teary eyes, Brenda announced, with, I have to say, a sense of self-worth that I hadn't seen in her before. She said, "And that was the day I discovered that I was the family treasure." Wow. I mean, it brought tears to me as well. "Brenda," I said, "what if God is like your grandma, not your dad? How would it change things if you imagined God as a warm, motherly figure who gathers you into her arms when you do something wrong or when you feel downcast or hurt, instead of the harsh father figure who admonishes you and disapproves of you?" Well, Brenda paused for a moment. I could almost hear the kind of wheels turning as the idea percolated through. "Can I really picture my gran when I think about God?" she asked. "Why not?" I said. "Why not?" You see, reinventing God, or at least reinventing the image and notion of God etched in her psyche, transformed Brenda's life completely for the better. She dumped the God who was a double for her father, and then began to flourish with a sense of this inner acceptance. So there's the question, is God like Brenda's grandma? Well, yes, but God's a mystery. God is a mystery beyond all our imagining. No representation of God can possibly be taken literally. So of course God's not literally like Brenda's grandma, not physically anyway or humanly, and yet it's impossible to exaggerate the difference that it made for Brenda to reinvent God in the image of her gran, to begin to see God through the lens of that unconditional love that she received from her grandma. So I've mentioned the book, and it's a blatant push really, but I actually think of all the books I've read, this is one of my favorites, and it's unpacking this whole idea of reinventing God in lots of different directions. So if you haven't read it, well, you might like to give it a try. So as we've been saying, faith is not about believing a set of ideas, doctrines, dogma, proposals, propositions. Faith is about a deep sense of inner trust. And how could Brenda have trusted that horrible God of her father? How could Brian trust the God that disapproved of him to the point that he felt life was no longer worth living? We can only trust a God who is trustworthy, and trustworthiness arises out of the experience of unconditional love. And so faith is to celebrate that love and to celebrate the gift of life with all the freedom and justice and love and beauty that that brings, to celebrate it for all we are worth. So that's what we're going to do now as we finish. And I invite you to say the white words after I say the others. For the gift of creation to play in, with rolling landscapes of delight, with wonders of earth and sea, and endless discovery of beauty, we give thanks. For our infinite diversity, with all the vivid colours of our differences, all the magic of our unknowns to be explored and celebrated, we give thanks. For our brother Jesus, who loved to feast with friends, who sat in silence on the mountain tops alone, whose spirit dances in all the earth, we give thanks. And we say together, Holy, loving God, mystery of the universe, who cannot ever truly be named, heaven and earth are filled with your wonder. Save us, we pray, from small minds and mean spirits. and fill us instead with passion for kindness and justice. So I hope you've got something to drink handy. I think you know what I'm getting. So if you'd like to, this is a new bottle, by the way, you might notice. If you'd like to just fill your glass or put something in there, whatever it is, orange juice, or even pick up your cup of tea, because we're going to make a toast. My dear friends, once again, we toast the glorious gift of life and the unconditional love that is at the heart of the universe. So please raise your glass and say after me, to life, l'chaim. And as we move forward in this time of greater freedom and opening up, moving out bravely or tentatively from this time of seclusion, we pray together. God, grant me the serenity to face life with hope instead of fear, courage to embrace each challenge as an opportunity to grow, and wisdom to draw on the support of others instead of relying simply on our own strength. Amen. And the bird for today. There are two of them here. Coots. I love coots. We've found a whole bunch of coots on the little lake that is on a farm near to where we are living at the moment, and we just love to go and visit them. But these are urban coots, actually. This is a photograph I took on Parliament Hill, at the ponds on Parliament Hill in North London. And the thing I really like about this picture, you can see that here are two coots building a nest, and they've each got some twigs in their mouths to build their nest, and the one is going away and bringing them back, and the other one is weaving them in. And there's something wonderful. They're kind of lovebirds, aren't they? There's something cooperative and something creative about them. This nest is just off the edge of the pond. I mean, if I were them, I'd have gone a bit further out, actually, but they built it on something that they found, some rocks or whatever. And you may notice that there's some plastic bottles floating around, and actually if the picture panned out, you'd see there's quite a lot of kind of rubbish around on the lake too. And what this picture made me think of is that this is what we are called to do and to be in the world, to people who are creating beauty in the midst of ugliness. And that's, dear friends, what being in the shed's all about. That's what being alive today, that's what surviving the pandemic is about, that we're bringing beauty into the midst of messiness and ugliness. And it's our high calling to be beauty makers. How wonderful is that? So I commend to you today the coots. If you could say the words in capital letters, we'll say a blessing together. Dear friends, go in faith, for there is God, riding in the light on the water, singing in the songs of the birds, sitting in the midst of the parties of life. We say together, we go in faith, to live in joyous freedom, to play in the creation, and to drink deeply of the generous cup of life. Amen. That's great. Thank you so much for being with me again here in the shed. And this morning I was out preaching, actually. Well, I did it here, but I was out preaching at St. John's Church in Hedge End. Lovely name, isn't it? Fancy living in Hedge End, which is down in Hampshire, near Southampton. And I was preaching there this morning on the gospel reading for the day, which is the story of the parable of the sower. And it's such a wonderful story. And I suppose in many ways turned the thing on its head from the way we commonly think about that story. So if you want to hear it, you can go to the website of St John's, Hedge End, or if you just want to get the sermon itself, I've posted that on my YouTube channel, so you can hear that there. So once again, thank you very much for being here. Please keep on getting in touch with me. If you want to come back to me on anything that I've said, please do that. And if you want to send in other questions, I'd love that. I'd love to hear from you. Well, you can do that through Facebook messages, through an email, or just posting on Facebook, any way at all. Thank you so much. Have a great week, and go well.